Hello, everyone, as you come into the room. Thanks for making the time to join us this evening. My name is Michael. I'm the events coordinator and publicist at Annie Bloom's Books. For those of you who aren't familiar with the store, we're located in Portland, Oregon, in the heart of Multnomah Village. We've been around for 42 years now, and we are still plugging along, super busy. It's great to see people back in the store. Our store is open again to in-store browsing. Masks are still required. We're open on weekdays from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. and weekends from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. Let me admit someone else here. And our website is always open. You can shop there day and night, annieblooms.com. We offer curbside pickup, in-store pickup now, local delivery, and various shipping options. We are finishing up our virtual reading series here with Kelly Williams Brown. She's the author of the new book. This is my favorite title ever. Easy Crafts for the Insane, a mostly funny memoir of mental illness and making things. So good. She'll be in conversation with Amy Dresner, author of the memoir, My Fair Junkie. Books are available to order at the link that I'm about to put into the chat right now. So you can click there and go and support these authors and Annie Blooms. We would really appreciate it. After the reading and conversation, there'll be a Q&A. Feel free to type questions into the chat and I can read those to the authors. Or you can pop on the screen after the reading portion and ask questions that way. We have 2 more people to admit here. Great to see so many people and a very cute dog icon. Avatar, that's awesome. Let's see. So yeah, let me tell you about Easy Crafts for the Insane. From the New York Times bestselling author of Adulting comes a story about how to make something when you're capable of nothing. Kelly Williams Brown, hold that thought, I'm meeting another person. Kelly Williams Brown had 700 bad days. Her marriage collapsed. She broke 3 limbs in separate and unrelated incidents. Her father was diagnosed with cancer and she fell into a deep depression that ended in what could delicately be referred to as a rest cure at an inpatient facility. Before that, she had several very good years. She wrote a best-selling book, spoke at NASA, had a beautiful wedding, and inspired hundreds of thousands of readers to live as grown-ups in an often screwed-up world, though these accomplishments mostly just made her feel fraudulent. One of the few things that kept her moving forward was, improbably, crafting. Not Martha Stewart perfect crafting either. What could be called simple, accessible, or perhaps rustic creations were the joy and accomplishments she found in her worst days. To craft is to set things right in the littlest of ways. No matter how disconnected you feel, you can still fold a tiny paper star, and that's not nothing. In Easy Crafts for the Insane, crafting tutorials serve as the backdrop of a life dissolved, then glued back together. Surprising, humane, and utterly unforgettable, this is a poignant and hysterical look at the unexpected, messy coping mechanisms we use to find ourselves again. Kelly Williams Brown is the New York Times bestselling author of Adulting and Gracious, a former reporter, ad copywriter, and Bourbon Street bartender. She lives with her giant neurotic dog in Salem, Oregon. I saw that dog on camera a little bit ago. Hopefully we'll get an appearance. She's joined by Amy Dresner, who's a journalist, author, and former comedian, as well as a recovering addict and alcoholic. She was a regular columnist for the addiction recovery magazine, thefix.com, for 7 years, and is freelanced for addiction.com, Psychology Today, Vice, Salon, and many other publications. We got more people to admit. Let's admit them all, admit all. Amy Dresner. Elle magazine compared Dresner's darkly comic memoir to Carrie Fisher's Postcards from the Edge and Mary Carr's Lit. That's good stuff. Calling Dresner's book One for the Ages. Dresner has appeared on the television show The Doctors and on numerous radio shows and broadcasts, including Dr. Drew, Dopey, and Rich Roll. She does regular speaking engagements around the US. She is the co-host to social worker Joe Schrank of the Rehab Confidential podcast. Her book is currently in development for a TV series, something to look forward to. So please welcome Amy and Kelly.
Hi.
Hello. Well, thank you so much for that intro and for having me at Annie Bloom's. I wish Amy and I could be in person. And Amy, thank you so much for
my pleasure.
Amazing questions, which I have had the pleasure of reading ahead of time so I can try to think of something smart to say about.
Yes, thank you, Michael, for having us and for that intro. All right, let's get rolling. You ready?
I'm ready. I've never been readier.
Okay. Look, I even printed them out.
Oh, such a pro.
And I wore a blouse for you instead of a t-shirt. Come on, I'm really trying here.
You look amazing. The questions are amazing.
I was hit by the connection between crafting and mindfulness and moving meditation when I was reading your book, and just getting out of your head and doing something with your hands. Did you ever realize that you were using one of the most powerful tools in dialectical behavioral therapy and 12-step?
So it's really interesting. So I used the crafts throughout the book as a little bit of a narrative device, but also I was very much obsessively crafting during this time. Like that was one of the only things I was really sort of capable of doing. And it's really interesting because, of course, it wasn't until I like stepped back and thought about the role crafting played that I really made the connection. But I think my brain knew before I did that when you're really zoned in on this little tiny thing, and it's like, okay, now we're going to fold this piece of paper at this angle. Now we're going to bring the needle up here and we're going to put it right back down there. Like, that's not time that you have to spend thinking about like how awful your life is or how you're screwing everything up or like go back to prior disappointments. It's just like you're focused and in that moment and trying to do the best action possible in that moment. And I think that for me, even now, it's funny because I was asked, I have an upcoming TV appearance, which is very exciting, but I was told tonight that instead of making one of the item, I need to make 6 of the items and they need to be ready tomorrow. And I was like tearing around my house, feeling stressed about this and feeling annoyed and being like, blah, 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 blah. And then I was like, and then once I actually started doing my watercolor, my whole mind calmed down and it's like, you're getting to craft. This is lovely. So for me, that's what crafting does, but I don't think it has to be crafting, right? I think people can get there with cooking or making music or whatever it is that you choose to do that brings you joy, that you do for yourself and not like with a certain expectation of output, can take you to that place.
Right. Thank you. So I had no idea that you coined adulting, which is now everywhere. And I'm not very good at my age because I was a horrible drug addict for very many years. So that's going to be my next book
you were busy.
Right. Busy shooting dope. But I'm still not good at adulting. Do you think anybody is good at it or do you think everybody is faking it? And how do some people learn these things and the rest of us sort of perpetually feel like a 15-year-old in a middle-aged person's body, just in wonderment of how people, know how to do their taxes or when to change, like when to rotate their tires and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah. So I certainly think that everyone thinks they're faking it. When I was reporting out that book, I talked because I didn't know how to be an adult. So I went and essentially did a big reporting project on it. And people would be like, well, I'm definitely not an adult, and then they would give me advice. And I'm like, you're a surgeon. You are, if you're not, then who is? Right. And so I think because we all.
That's kind of terrifying, to be honest, that a surgeon's like, no, I really am not an adult. And let me cut into your brain now.
Here we go. Crack open the skull. I don't know what I'm doing. Just casual, just a real casual surgeon. I love that idea. So I think everybody, whatever part of adulthood you're good at, you say, well, that's not the important part, and whatever part you're not good at, you're like, that's what actually counts.
Grass is always greener.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's like, I'm messy. So to me, I would be an adult if I weren't messy. And that's what, what I mean? So I think we all do that. And I think, part of that book, there was a question of like whether that book was compatible with this book, which is always like, it was an interesting tension, right? Because people thought of me as this person who had it together, even though it was very clear that I did not have it together. In print, in interviews, everywhere, I was like, I don't know these things. That's why I made this.
But people make assumptions when you write a book.
They do. Yeah. And then you become like the adulting girl. By the way, I'm sorry for that word, everyone. I know it's annoying. It annoyed me the first time I said it.
Do you say journaling also? Please don't say, you don't say journaling, do you?
I neither say it nor practice it,
okay,
Amy.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, never. Yeah.
So I am also a lifelong depressive. Woohoo! Who wants to marry me? And although my first book was not a New York Times bestseller, Not jealous at all. I got what I wanted, which was a book deal, adulation, blah, blah, blah. And I found that it did not make me full and happy like I thought it would. However, it didn't keep me from thinking that the next big thing would, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think we're alone in this. And maybe it's an evolutionary thing to be like, yay, and then move on so we don't just sit still and die. But the thing I learned was, oh God, the answer and the solution is not outside of me. It is inside of me. And inside of me was a mess. So that was like a really terrifying thought. Can you speak to that?
Yeah. I feel that I totally relate to that feeling so much of, you know, because when you don't have something, you can make up a story about what it means, right? Like, if I have X accolade or Y thing happen in my life, then I will be Z. And it never works that way. It just does not work that way. Because there's a hunger for more, right? Like, and so for me, something, and I don't want to like skip ahead here, but like something I really, really think about is, how do I cultivate like contentment in my day to day? You know, and when the inside,
and not chase happiness or goals, because my father always said, if you're you can't chase happiness. Happiness is a fleeting thing, and it's maybe, you know, contentment is the byproduct, if you're lucky, of doing something that is meaningful to you.
Yeah, I think that's right. And like, how long are we actually like happy? You know what I mean? That it comes, it goes, and really, you know, finding small things that bring me joy in the life that I have built for myself is what makes me feel stable on the inside as well.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's been a lot of boring work, like, you know, like non-glamorous stuff. Like I think I got all of my glamour out ages, you know, 28 when the book was published, like 31. I had an extremely glamorous 3 years. And now the rest of it is just like, okay, let's maintain our relationships and maintain our house and maintain our inner selves, you know?
Yeah. So you write, well, we just talked about that. About pursuing contentment over being happy. Describe the difference for everybody and why this is so important. I mean, I think you covered that.
I mean, I can say, like, I can give examples of contentment.
Sure, do it.
So
it's your show, run it.
I'm going to run this show. Thank you,
You
Amy.
be the boss. Come on now.
Me. Yeah, I'm the one who asks the questions now.
Oh, okay. All right now.
Turning all the tables. So, you know, it was really, really frustrating to. Everyone else loved the pandemic except for me. I was the only one who was inconvenienced by the pandemic. No, I'm totally kidding, you know, but
I was like,
yeah, no, the pandemic was definitely about me. No, not to make the pandemic about me. But one thing that was a big challenge for me, like it was for a lot of people, of course, is that everything was instantly upended and our lives were totally different. And for me, that instantly took away a lot of the sort of safeguards and bumpers I had built into life for myself.
Like routine, especially.
Exactly. You know, I have a job with a nonprofit because I can't stay at home and write. I have to get up. I have to put makeup on. I have to be expected to be somewhere at a certain time and accountable to people, you know, and I wanted to build connections in my community. So I started leading a Girl Scout troop and I started a trivia night, and I felt really good and, you know, stable. And then all of those things left. And so it was like, okay, well, how do I make that even smaller without going back to just living in my house and lying on the couch and spending my savings on Jimmy John's? Because
what are Jimmy John's?
Oh, it's a bad sandwich chain. I mean, it's not bad. I enjoy it.
It's a bad sandwich?
Yeah, it's not. Well, look, I live in Salem, and sometimes options for people who will deliver to you are limited here.
Jimmy John? Okay. It doesn't seem like something a Jew would eat, but okay.
No, I don't think
it's like an LA
set
thing.
Foot in a Jimmy John's under any circumstance.
So we both wrote about depression in our books.
Mm-hmm.
Why is depression and mental illness still so stigmatized? I mean, I think it's because you can't see it on an x-ray, you know what I mean, like a broken bone, when I had hand surgery and couldn't do anything, people brought food, drove me places, opened jars for me, cleaned my house, bathed me, just a little creepy. But when I go into a depressive episode, it's like, oh, there she goes again, you know, and she's so ungrateful. She likes to feel sorry for herself. She loves the pity party. It's like, no, my brain is not working right now. And like you said, something that I've always in the book that I'd say, it's like my brain has a cold. That's what it feels like. Like my brain is sick right now, and then it passes. So why is it still so stigmatized? And how besides writing about it, do we break that stigma?
I mean, I totally think you're right. You know, there's no blood test, right? It's just based on like observable behavior. And so you can never, you know, there's always going to be people out there who think, well, it's just not real. And, you know, that's fine. People think a lot of different things. People think vaccines aren't real. People, you know what I mean? Like people are entitled to their opinions, you know, even though I may not hold them. I think another big challenge of it is that, you know, mental illness changes our behavior. You know, if you have a broken hand, you still feel like Amy to people. Whereas, you know, if like people have object permanence, they know that you're still Amy.
Right.
Whereas, you know, if you are in a depressive episode, or as happened to me in the book, as a result of a medication, like a manic depressive episode,
I've had that also. Yes.
You know, then your behavior is not great. And I myself have struggled to think about, okay, so I did not choose to behave this way. This was a result, a medical outcome of something that happened. But regardless, it was still behavior, and it still harmed people, and it still hurt people.
Yeah.
And how do you take accountability for that, but also honor the fact that like nobody is choosing this? I mean, it's a question I think about a lot, and I don't have a good answer to. I think in terms of the stigma though, I mean, I think talking about it is really helpful. I think something else that's great is that so many strides are being made in our understanding of the human brain and the role that genetics play, and the role that, you know, nature and nurture, all those things play. They're finding like a little bit of a shared genetic component, if I understood this article correctly, between like 5 different things that were long thought to be separate, one of which is autism, one schizophrenia, bipolar, depression, and OCD. And they think it's all a little bit of the same thing.
You said that in the book, yes?
Yeah.
You did say that in the book, yeah.
And so, you know, one thing that I love is people are starting to talk about being like neuroatypical. Like my brain doesn't,
or neurodivergent.
Right, exactly. And I really enjoy that, because it's like, yeah, some people are tall, some people are short, some people have dark hair, some people have light hair. There are different ways of being a human, and hopefully we're doing things that make it easy for everyone, even people who are maybe slightly outside the norm. So that's a long-winded answer to a very good question.
So you quote your mom's best friend, Carol, who was an artist, and she said, tenderness, she said, is the price of being an artist. And if you want to see and create things that other humans haven't seen or created, that means you're going to feel things a little bit more than others do. Those two parts of oneself cannot be divorced. The pain is both a feature and a bug. So there is a lot of research about the link between mental illness, depression, and creativity. I've written quite a few articles about it, and that makes me feel better personally, because I'd like to know that there's an upside to, you know, my mental illness. All my favorite artists, painters, writers were unbelievably depressed. Is it worth it? And I mean, I don't think we have a choice, but is it worth it?
I mean, every single one of your questions are so good. Like a spoonful weighs a ton. I'm like, there's like 14 different answers I have. It's so good. But I mean, I would say in this case, you know, it doesn't matter. You know, I don't like when people, you know, something that kind of bothers me, that I think it's easy to kind of like fetishize our own or other people's mental illness, where you're like, well, he was a tortured genius, you know, and then that can like also make people think like, okay, well, if I seek help for this thing, then I won't be myself. I won't be creative. I won't be this. I won't be that, you know? So I always want to make sure that I'm not, you know, doing the whole tortured artist stereotype too much. I think, my feeling based on what I believe and no scientific evidence whatsoever, but I mean, I have to assume that for depression and for these kinds of things to happen again and again for so many people, there have to be evolutionary and social benefits to this. There actually is, a little bit of evidence that maybe it's useful to the species to have depressive people because we're really good at, I'm not kidding, ruminating. Like we're really good at just like thinking and obsessing over a problem to the detriment of like everything else in our lives, including eating and sleeping. And I think, I think if maybe you see the world a little bit differently, or it's a little bit sort of more difficult for you to move through it, then maybe you also see other ways for the world to be. And maybe that comes through in your art. That discomfort, I mean, this is such a small thing, but I think discomfort and creativity are very linked. For example, when I write, I don't like to write at home because I'm comfortable here. This is my resting place. This is my house. So what I do instead is I drive to a coffee shop or to a bar or someplace where it's just, I'm a little uncomfortable. The chair isn't good because it's like, get your work done. And then you get to go back to the comfort.
Interesting. Okay.
You know what I mean? And if you're totally comfortable, you're probably not going to make anything. You're probably just like enjoying your happy, healthy relationships and cleaning your house and like meal prepping. I don't know what happy
meal prepping. Really?
I sure don't meal prep. I don't know about you.
No. Oh, hi. No, I can't cook.
Yeah, no, I mean, people who have their lives really together and really feel, I think, comfortable with who they are, aware of who they are, like probably like not a lot of rocking the boat. They just do happy, normal things instead.
I don't know who those people are. And so
I know like 2 or 3 normal people. And I'm always like, what is it like? Like, what is it? It's so hard to imagine a life in which sometimes I just am like, I don't feel like being alive the same way I sometimes don't feel like going and meeting up with a friend. It's like, do I have to?
Right.
And some people never have that feeling. Yeah. And it's hard, because you're only ever in your own head, right?
Right.
And so
but I think when you talk about it, I mean, when I've talked about it, when you're talking about it, other people identify. I think it's so important to verbalize this stuff because other people are, oh my God, me too. I'm not alone. I'm not crazy. Oh my God. You know what I mean? That's been my experience when I say the most horrible, embarrassing thoughts. It's like, your stuff is not that unique. It really isn't. No. Or maybe my fan base is very mentally ill. I don't know. It's like, no. Which is totally possible,
Maybe both. No, you have a wonderful fan base. And, no, I mean, I think, you've
got to tell the truth. I mean, we've got to say the thing that everyone's thinking that no one dares say so that people don't feel alone. I really think that. And it's like,
I think so too. And I think like, again, and maybe this is like an evolutionary thing, we're so afraid to be vulnerable, and we're so, no, you're not. And I like, clearly, like I gave up on caring a lot about what people think of me. Otherwise I wouldn't have written this book.
How did you feel okay, it's come out. How did you feel? So you wrote a memoir, which is, it's very vulnerable, right? How did you feel before it came out and how do you feel now?
So it's really been an evolution, and I was kind of surprised at my own reaction, because from the very beginning, I sort of felt like I had to write this book. Like I really wanted to chronicle this journey and also sort of give voice to a lot of experiences that I think are very normal experiences, but maybe we don't have scripts for. Like, for example, like losing a really close female friendship. I don't know why, but a lot of women have had that experience and like, we're so ashamed of it. Like, it's like, you must've been a bad friend or the X, Y, or Z, So anyway, this is a long-winded way of saying, I felt like I had to write it, but I thought I've always been a fairly private person. And I am like a sort of a character in, when I had a column or when I was in a book, but I was just sort of like this hapless, like, I don't know what's going on, which is true, but that's a very small, I was almost like a foil. Right. And this time it's just me.
Right.
And that was terrifying.
Right.
But and I thought, you know, if you'd asked me, how are you going to feel the night before the book comes out or in the week run up, I would have said, I'm going to be throwing up. I'm going to be having panic attacks. I'm going to be having throw up panic attacks, you know, just like just piteous. And yet when the time came, I had spent so much time with this story and also have fundamentally really, really changed as a person from the person in this story.
Yes.
And worked so hard on it that I was like, this is sort of a story about another person, about someone who is not me anymore.
Right.
And I also feel like I wrote the very best book that I personally can write.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, I felt really content with it. I felt like as this may make me sound pompous or full of myself or whatever, but I felt like I was brave in a way that hopefully will bring other people comfort. And I was proud of myself for that.
No, I don't think that sounds pompous at all, you know? And it was like, my father said, once you write a book and you finish it, then it becomes a story and it's no longer you. And I don't think people realize like how long it takes to actually get a book published. You know what I mean? By the time it comes out, it's, you know, a year or two or whatever, depending also on the time frame of what you were writing about, you know?
Yeah.
So it's like, so you were pretty ballsy to talk about your dislike of Trump. That's a big theme in the book. And were you worried that it might put some people off your book or you? I seem to offend people daily without even ever touching politics. So, and you know, we had the same editor for both of our books, which is how we got connected. And I remember some of her notes being kind of like a bit much, like tone it down, like, oh, you know, and I remember telling her that I needed to be true to who I was at the time and not pander. And it was okay if people thought that I was an asshole, as long as I was an interesting and creative asshole. So what was her take on the political part, and what's been the feedback, and how did you feel about that?
I'm so sorry. So Michelle is an amazing editor, and we went 6 rounds, and this book was not good at all at the beginning of that. Now it is, but she definitely said, I need a lot less Trump on the page. Which is fair. That's a fair thing to say. And there is, I didn't cut all of it, because to me, at least, that election felt like a very destabilizing event. And I'm not saying it was personally destabilizing, because it was not. I mean, my life more or less continued the same way, but emotionally it was very destabilizing. And I think, I'm sure there are going to be people who will read that part, I mean, and be like, F you, I love this man, or I totally believe something different, or, or who cares that much? And those are all reasonable feelings to have. You can feel however way you want about my book. I would note that I think regardless, if you are someone who has strong political opinions on either side, you do know what it feels like when something happens and you're like, why is this makes no sense, and so, I'm sure, I know there's people on the other side who had very, very similar feelings when Biden was elected.
Of course.
So, I mean, I think it's
she did push back a little bit on it.
She did push back, and I did
cut it down.
I did take some out. But for me, and I think for a lot of people, the sort of, because I do follow the news, like the daily chaos of what was going on was very stressful to me. And for whatever reason, I really honed in on it and got into this place where I was just constantly reading the New York Times, Washington Post, Politico, I would refresh Twitter, just compulsive.
Right.
It was extremely unhealthy. And so I did want to be honest about that in the book, and how living my life sort of where I wasn't really here. I was in Washington, D.C., but just as a passive observer of so much craziness. Not great. I would not recommend it. Doesn't work out. Turns out.
So you were an editorial writer and reporter, and your first 2 books are like a collection of interviews, right? Which is sort of the same vein as being editorial and writer, I think, you know?
Mhm. Yeah.
And this book is your first full out memoir. Well,
Right.
welcome to Memoir. It's a
Oh, thank you.
completely different animal. Was it easy for you to adjust to this new type of writing? And did you find it cathartic to relive all this stuff, or painful, or both? And did your ex-husband or ex-boyfriend read it? And if so, how did they feel? How did your friends feel?
Yeah, I mean, writing this book was horrible.
Yeah.
It is not, like, I don't like writing in general. I know some
No
people,
writer. I know writers. No
yeah,
writers
no,
do. Is that funny? I know, right?
well, it's unpleasant. It's, you know, and sometimes you get in a flow and it's really going and you're
Yes.
like, okay,
Yes.
this is kind of satisfying. I like having written something.
Yes.
I mean, like working out or something, you know, I'm sure it's same deal. So,
Yes.
but this was really hard. And, you know, especially with the edits that I got, you know, this book was a lot more toothless before it went through the editorial process. And I really didn't say anything even potentially negative about anyone, which made for a weird book because I'm like, everybody's perfect. These people are great. They have no flaws. And now I'm in
Yeah,
terrible
it's
shape.
boring.
You know what I
It's
mean?
not,
And
and it's
now
not boring. It's not true. You
it's
know.
not true. Right. So it was really a challenge. And, you know, I was doing all the edits of this book last year during the summer, and it was hard. I think it would have been hard anytime to, you know, I would get a note back from Michelle that would be like, you know, you don't talk about this family member much. Are they depressed? You know, do they have mental illness? What's going on there? And I was like, wow, that's a lot of question. A lot of question and a
That's your
little bit.
southern side. That's like all private and stuff. You know.
Well, you know, I don't want
She was
to.
always trying to take my fangs out. She was turn it down a little bit.
You know, you got to amp some up. You got to bring.
Did anyone you know read it and contact you that was in it?
Yeah. So ahead of time, I did talk to people who were some of the people in the story. And I would say, you know, this is my recollection of this. What do you recall about this? Like what stood out to you about that time or this experience? But with what is arguably perhaps the four main characters, which is my ex-husband, an ex-boyfriend, and two friends that I, you know, with the aforementioned friend breakup, I don't have the relationship with them now where I wanted to send them stuff ahead of time, or even, you know, like, you know, with the two exes, like we're on friendly terms, like we'll text each other like something funny or makes us think of the other, like every now and again. Those are like one text every 3 months.
But did they read it?
No, they did not. And so that was
a choice on their part to not read it.
Well, they've read it since it came out, but I didn't send it to them ahead of time. Actually, yeah, they both read it and they both sent me some really thoughtful, kind responses.
Yeah,
you
but
know,
that's because you were nice about people. I wasn't nice about people. That's why my book had to be legally vetted so many times.
Well, I mean, I was glad because it's really important to me just to realize that, like, when I'm writing about someone in a memoir, they have no way of responding to that ever, right? Like they're not going to get, this is my side of the story, you know, and it's not going to be publicized by Penguin Random House. You know, it's just going to be them complaining. And so I really felt a big need to think deeply into the motivations and reasoning of people who are not me and who I am not on good terms with in some cases. And I also wanted to be really mindful that, you know, there's a lot of stuff that happened that is not in the book, you know, and sometimes I was really honest with and open with the reader about it, where I said, this part is too private and I can't share it, you know, but you're just going to have to trust me that, you know, something happened here and this is the outcome and we're on the other side. Because you know, I feel like by being my friend or by dating me, somebody is not necessarily consenting to be written about. In fact, they're not. But you know, that there's no way to get around it with a memoir. You know,
like no one's dated me since my book because no one wants to be written about.
Well, I happen to know that is not true, but we can talk about that offline.
Fine. So you write, I am not always a reliable narrator because I always put the best spin on things. I fill in the gaps with more palatable details. This is like
retcon.
retcon them into something, thank you.
Wink.
Retcon them into something that isn't quite so gutting to look at. There's a debate about whether this is healthy, but I believe this is what has helped me survive. So is anybody a reliable narrator of their life, really? I mean, we all do things to survive, and we both have used humor as a coping mechanism to get through some really, really horrible things. I don't make things less palatable, and many people have found my book hard to read. I think you even said that. If you didn't know that I was okay, you would have had a hard time getting through it.
It was hard.
And other people have been relieved by the realness. Do you think that this is part of your Southern upbringing of being polite and making things look pretty?
I mean, maybe that probably is a part of it. I think a part of it is that, you know, the story that you tell yourself becomes sort of morphs into the memory. You know what I mean? Like, we know that like eyewitnesses in trials are notoriously unreliable. You know, if you ask two people who looked at an accident to tell you what happened, they're going to tell you two different things. It's incredibly subjective. And as a reporter, that was very frustrating to me because I really wanted this to be the capital T truth of what happened. I wanted to be able to quote everyone verbatim, and you just can't. Like, maybe you could if you are some sort of person who writes extreme notes in your journal every day. But I'm not that person, you know? So, but I could like look back at texts, look back at messages, and sort of go to like the document record. And that was helpful. But it's, again, like I feel like my outlook on things, that the further I get from something, the easier and happier it seemed than it was in the moment. Like, I think that's a really healthy part of me. I've heard that as memories get older, and I feel like maybe this is just like a really nice feature of being human. Like, you tend to remember the good ones as better than they were, and the bad ones as not quite as bad as they were. Sure, that's true. And I think I think that is like a coping mechanism that a lot of us have. So we're not just gutted every day anew by, a recollection of the worst day of our lives.
Right.
And I also, I always try to find what's funny about something. And once I can figure out what's funny, then I have power over that thing. My digestion time from like something horrible happening to this is actually very funny has gotten like real quick. That was one tool that writing this book gave me. Now it's hard to get me upset about things because all the worst things have already happened. You know what I mean? I mean, knock on wood, not all the worst things, obviously.
Right. But
a lot of them.
The problems you mentioned with finding a good psychiatrist are the same problems people with addiction have getting into care. And so even if you aren't depressed or strung out, it's nearly impossible to navigate the system. And that's if you have insurance. So when I was on Medi-Cal disability, no psychiatrist wanted to treat me because I was a recovering addict and alcoholic. So what can we do? How do we bridge this gap? I was lucky to have a family that took charge and made calls, but not everybody is in that position. Because when you're really ill and depressed or in your addiction, you can't navigate the system. Right. And the system is hard to navigate even when you have your right mind.
Right.
Or you're not in your active addiction. Tell us your experience with that and finding help and finding the right help, and how do we fix this? How do we make this easier?
I mean, if I had an answer for that, like, I wouldn't be talking to you. I would be like doing very important, because like it's such a big question. Like, I wouldn't be writing books. I would be like, hopefully, like, I don't know. It's so difficult. And like, we see everywhere. I mean, I think we're living in times of despair. Yeah. I really do. I think people are terribly lonely. I think the social net has frayed to the bitter end. I mean, at least up here in Oregon, you see homelessness becoming more and more and more of a problem. People are like falling down between the cracks. And I don't know. I don't know what it is. There's personal and one-time things. Like, one thing I always tell people is, a great thing is crisis lines. Like, you do not have to be, up on the top of the building, standing on the ledge to call a crisis line. I will mention two of them. One is 800-273-TALK. The other one is a text one, and you can text home to 741-741. And that is an opportunity to talk to someone who you don't know, but is there. They are trained in de-escalation techniques. Right. every time I've had one of those calls, and I've been specific, I've said, I'm not a danger to myself or to others, so if you have priority calls, then feel free to hang up, but they really don't. And they talk you through it. I think a lot of group therapy is much more available and much cheaper. There's AA meetings everywhere. And even if you're not an addict or an alcoholic, if you're someone who struggles with your own brain, they've got a lot of tips and tricks and wisdom, and you can go anytime.
Yep.
And you can Google also like your county mental health services and see what they offer. But it's horrible. I mean, we're really, really making it very hard for people. I think if you personally, are depressed or unwell and you're trying to get better, it can be, you can ask someone who loves and cares about you for help. And it can be really simple. Hey, can you see if there are any therapists in town that take Blue Cross Blue Shield or whatever it is, and 311 helplines, a lot of cities and jurisdictions have those can also help get people connected. But it's, I don't have a solution for the system, and I really wish
I don't think we have it yet.
No, and I think we just have to like do our best to take care of each other, and
I think that's
the answer should be better, but that's what it is right now.
Yeah. Well, I think that we were supposed to take questions at 7:40. Michael, are there questions? Otherwise, I can keep going. I've got 3 pages of questions here.
I don't see any questions in the chat, but we could invite people on to screen.
Yeah, if you have a question for Kelly, put it in the chat. Otherwise, I will keep rambling.
All right. I think your questions are great. But yes, any audience questions, I'm very open to.
Yeah. So you talk about losing friends and the abandonment when you started to fall apart. And I experienced the same thing in my addiction. And especially after I was arrested and thrown in the psych ward, I understand that we become too much for people when we're out of it, when we're in our crisis, and we give too little, right? And that they don't know what to say.
Right.
Especially with suicide attempts or overdoses, people just get really freaked out. And they have their own problems and their own lives. The friends that have stuck by me through my multiple rehabs, my arrests, my suicide attempts, to me are so treasured because they never abandoned me. They always saw me within whatever mental illness or addiction I was going through. I think the biggest surprise regarding my suicide attempts were that, like you said, people aren't grateful that I was alive. They were very angry that I tried to take my life. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I've only really ever had one, and people were grateful I was alive, and they were really pissed at me. Yeah. And I understand that, because if I had done to another human what if I had hurt someone else to that degree, then I would be in jail for the rest of my life. And I did that to someone they love, who is also me. And I did it even though I was really, like I said, in a medication-induced bad place at the time. But it still happened, and I still had a lot of work to do to, sort of apologize and, to people who were close to me and let them know, like, hey, this is why that happened. I am so sorry that happened. Yeah. I know learning about this, it stresses people out. It traumatizes them.
Very much so. Very much so. Like one of my friends will cry about it still. And it's been years.
Yeah. I mean, there's someone very, very close to me who was just thinking about it and had a plan. And this happened in literally 2005. And this person is doing great. Their life is happy. And that was 16 years ago. And I still get so upset.
Yeah.
And so I can't really imagine what it's like for my mom or, my partner at the time. And I think, like one 12-step concept is, sometimes you can't make an amend to someone because the gravity of what you've done is just too great. And it would F up their life if you showed up and like reopen the wound. Right? And so in that case, what you do is you have to make a living amend.
Absolutely.
You just have to do your best every day in this arena. And so for me, what that looks like is every day I'm I am making like the things that keep me safe and sane and connected to my community, connected to other people, connected to life. Like those are priorities and they're important and they must be done. And that's my amend. You know, that's what I can do.
Right.
I can't
Taking care,
undo.
self-care. I hate that word, but it's like, but self-care,
Yeah.
taking care
And
of yourself. Yeah.
yeah. And it's not just like taking a bath. You know what I mean? It's like actively working on, I mean, I take many baths a day and I don't consider that. I consider that just standard human action, like taking multiple baths in a day. I know. Yeah. It's
relaxation.
Just, I mean, how else am I supposed to think and receive telephone calls? Not in the bathtub. I love talking to people when I'm in the tub.
You're such an old movie star.
Oh, thank you. I try. You know, so I mean, so that's what I can do. And I can hopefully help other people with theirs. And, you know, and I, you know, after the loss of these two friendships, I worked really hard to reconnect with friends that I had sort of like lost along the way. Yeah. And that wasn't about like, hey, I'm back and I'm well. It's like, hey, how have you been? You know what I mean? I miss you. What's going on in your life?
Not making about you.
Yeah, exactly. And so yeah, there we go. I don't know. Maybe I've backed into an answer. Maybe I haven't.
No, you absolutely did. So I've never been good about faking having it together, but you did that in the psych ward really well. And I remember my father saying to me, if you want to get out of there, you better act like someone who can get out of there.
Right.
You know, because I was just curled up in my bed and I wasn't going to groups and I wasn't eating. And I was like, you know, he's like, if you want to get out of there, you better act like someone can get out of there. And I was like, oh, your care sounded much better than mine. But why are psych wards so depressing when we're put there for depression or a suicide attempt? They're so depressing. The food is horrible. There's no windows. I mean, it's like, you know, and do you think that pretending to be more recovered or well than you were was a good move in retrospect?
As for why they're so depressing, I think the idea is like, we're going back to the basics here. You know what I mean? Like you don't get to decide where you're going to go. You don't get to decide what kind of food you're going to have. You don't get to, you know what I mean? Like we're making all of those decisions for you, right. And you can just chill the F out. Like that's your job right now. I mean, it's not like the most therapeutic place, but you know, and it's for stabilization. Like in my case, that's exactly what happened. Like if it were another organ and it's like I had gone to the hospital very ill and then they figured out what the problem was and came up with a good diagnosis, came out with a very effective treatment plan, that would be like a great story. You know what I mean? Like everyone would be like, that's wonderful. So, I mean, it worked for me. I can't recommend it for everyone. Don't just do it for fun. But yeah, I was, don't.
You're only there once. I've been there 4 times.
Well, like maybe that's why you find it depressing. It like for me, it was just like a fun, like new spot, just exploring a new way to be where I don't have any choices. And it was funny because I really did. I acted like absurdly normal. I was like, well, I need to be 100% on my game here and totally normal, totally sane. Like, oh my gosh, that thing that happened, it's so weird. That was like a one-time thing, guys. I've definitely like been okay. I haven't been like lying on my couch the last 2 years. So I don't know why you would think that. That's definitely not what's happened. Like I was wearing like, I'm not kidding you, like business casual dresses from Banana Republic, like, you know, just like a gray one, like nice jewel neck, no necklace, because you're not allowed to have necklaces in there, so couldn't accessorize the way I like, but you know, and then like nude heels. And actually, I'm not kidding you, both.
You weren't in the gown and pants? I couldn't wear my own clothes, really? We must have been in different.
I guess, I don't know, because I requested my own clothes. And so both staff and other fellow asylumees thought I was a new coworker, or like they thought I was like a behavioral therapist or something. And I'm like, no, I'm actually.
I thought I was the therapist. Definitely nobody thought I was
here. The therapist. Yeah, and I was like, well, this is great. You know, we're making some new connections. We're so and like I tried to make everything so normal when I had conversations with them. It wasn't like I have become obsessive about watching and reading the news and I can't do other stuff. I have, you know, I feel so alone all the time and so scared. I have no good concept of what my future looks
You were
like. It was
completely
like,
dishonest,
oh
basically.
yeah, it was like, yeah, the Blazers did great. Like, are you going on any trips this summer? Like, what are you up to? Tell me about you, you know? I think it worked a little too well because I got out in 3 days, which my mom, who saw through all of this, was
Right.
not delighted about.
I'm sure. I'm sure.
Because she knew correctly that I wasn't okay.
Right.
So again, pros and cons to faking sanity. Well, clearly not.
So I love that you talk about your distaste and fear and shame about possibly being bipolar 2. And you mentioned girl interrupted territory, which is actually about borderline personality disorder. I have to correct you.
Oh, sorry,
which is one of my many and extraordinarily sexy diagnoses. Why are we cool with depression and ADHD, but bipolarity or personality disorders are totally not okay? Is it because on every Dateline or 2020, the person that did something horrible and like chopped up their husband was borderline or bipolar?
I like to think that some of them probably were perfectly normal, perfectly healthy individuals who made a choice. No, I mean, I think, you know, at one point, you know, because I had this mania that was brought on by the antidepressant, there was a big question of, you know, do you have bipolar 2 and ADHD, or do you have depression and ADHD? Because it's really hard with women particularly to discern between those two, because a lot of sort of ADHD stuff can also look a little bit like a hypomania, like not a super high mania, but like just up, productive, focused, you know, really honed in on something. And I don't know. I mean, it's really hypocritical because I've always been someone who is like open and honest about mental health. I don't feel like there should be a stigma. I do what I can to make sure there's not a stigma, you know, but then he said that and I was like, whoa, sir, like ADHD, depression, disordered eating, addictive issues, fine. This absolutely not. Right. How dare you? How dare you? Right. And you know, I think I think we have gotten better and better. I think we're, you know, something that blows my mind. Do you know when the first memoir about depression was published?
When?
1989.
Wow.
Really, nobody had like addressed it.
What are you talking about? Resignation?
No. It was before that. It was a gentleman who wrote it. I should get all the details nailed down. But that was like one of the first times someone said, I have depression. This is my experience, you know, and not just like the euphemism of misery or whatever literary treatment, like actually talking about it.
William Styron, The Darkness or whatever. Not William Styron. Yeah. Am I right?
I think so. Yeah. That sounds right to me. You know, and as we go, we understand more things. I think, you know, one thing that can be challenging, and I can't speak to borderline, but I know with, you know, some of the personality disorders is that right now we don't have effective treatment. And that doesn't mean we're not going to have effective treatment. And you know what I mean? And because of that, you know, I think it's hard for people to be like, okay, again, this is like something that's going on in the brain that's not healthy, you know, and not this person is choosing to act in a way that I don't care for, you know? And I also think that, you know, I mean, one thing that I've learned is, I mean, there's no blood test, like you said up front. And my psychiatrist, I've gone back and forth and I'm like, which is it? Is it, you know, unipolar depression? Is it bipolar depression? Like I have sort of like my gut instinct and my psychiatrist's gut instinct on what it is, but I'm never going to know. You know what I mean? And
well, a lot of the symptoms overlap, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
I was right. Styron Memoir. Oh, it's right. Ooh. So you're right. People sometimes say they worry medication will make them less of themselves. Of course, I can only speak to my own experience, but to me, it makes me more of myself. I feel happy when good things happen and sad when bad things happen. So I've written that medication doesn't make you happy or high. It makes you undepressed, which is not the same thing. Otherwise, I wouldn't have done drugs on top of psych meds. There's a huge difference. And I just have like less days where I wake up and want to die and just more normal days. It just puts the net, it pulls it up a little bit. But I have heard people say that they've taken medication and felt numb or weird. And then I think, well, then you're on the wrong medication, or maybe you don't need medication. Of course, one med that caused a manic episode for me was Effexor. And I karate chopped a realtor. It wasn't a good day. It was a bad moment, a very bad moment.
I'm so sorry, but also I sort of treasure imagining that, and I don't want to make light of your pain, but
I was like, whoa! It was not good. It was bad. Antidepressants prescriptions went up 40% during the pandemic. Okay. Suicide skyrocketed. I think it was like 200%. Overdoses went up. Do you think that maybe we're turning a corner on the I don't want anyone to know I'm on medication thing?
I mean, I think so. I think like, especially with like the younger people who are younger than me, like young millennials, Gen Z, are super comfortable, it's just like, oh, this, I have red hair. I live in Salem, Oregon. I have a diagnosis of blah, blah, blah. So I think, I think that like I said earlier, I think we do live in times of despair, and I think we're very like atomized and disconnected from one another. Yeah. And screens don't help. I can't wait until we're all doing fully all the time in person things again. But I do really feel like we're getting there. And yeah, I just have to echo you, like being not depressed does not equal happy.
Right.
And cause like I said, when good things happen, I can feel joy instead of when good things happen, I feel nothing. When bad things happen, I'm like, that seems right, or nothing.
Right.
When I'm not on medication. Medication is a pain though.
It's an art and not a science.
It is. And I would say, we've already talked about all the barriers, but if you were someone who medication is part of your treatment and your mental health plan, I would really, 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 really highly, highly recommend that you do your best to get into with a psychiatrist. And it may take months. It may take 6 months. It may take 9 months, because they're so powerful. But then eventually, like, hopefully you find something that works, and then it'll work for a few years and then it stops working. And
I think there's a blood test now where you can see which ones will hopefully like most likely work for you, but that didn't exist when. I have one last question for you, and we're almost out of time. So your book is ultimately about resilience, which is sort of what my book is about too. And I don't think we know how resilient we are until we're put to the test. So my first reaction is like, F this, self-pity, depression. And then we sort of gather ourselves and acclimate and figure it out. I'd personally love to skip that sort of tantrum part, and go straight to just handling it. But I don't seem to be able to do that. Can you do that?
I think that I think my digestion time has gotten quicker than it used to be. But I approach my emotions in a different way than I used to, where I say, okay, I'm having a feeling about this. This is a feeling that I'm having, and I don't have to figure out if it's reasonable or unreasonable, or I'm having too much of it or too little of it. Like, I don't have to have feelings about my feelings.
Right.
And I don't have to pretend that this feeling is going to last forever, that this is a new permanent state of being, because whenever anything happens, we're like, well, now it's just like this forever,
of course,
even though we're wrong every time. Like that's
the problem.
That's the nature of life. And so I think I'm just like, well, having some feelings, get to have those feelings, but what are we going to do?
Absolutely.
Is the important question, two great questions that my therapist said I should always ask myself is, can you do something? Should you do something? And that is really helpful to me, because if I can't do anything, it's like, okay, well, I should probably put my energy elsewhere towards something that I can do. And if I shouldn't do something, it's like, which I have a lot of thoughts, Amy, about how everyone should be conducting their lives at all times. It's one of my most charming, and I sometimes
it sounds amazing.
I even share. Yeah. People absolutely love it. But remembering that it's just like, you just because you can do something does not mean you should do something. And it's that discernment, I think, that just really helps. And, in conclusion, I do want to thank, everyone who came and attended. And Amy, thank you again for these amazing questions. And thank you to Michael and Amy Blooms. But I just want to say, we can get through a lot more than we think we can.
Absolutely.
And for me, at least, when having had all these bad things happen, people are like, I'm sorry that happened. And I'm like, well, I'm not, because I feel like I really have such a sense of what I can get through. Absolutely. I have so many more tools that I didn't have. And for me, like being able to approach when bad things happen, being like, okay, well, what can I get out of this? What's worth taking with me, has really done a lot. So I hope everyone out there is doing well. And if you're not, just keep going. It's not going to be like this forever.
Awesome. Michael?
Thank you too very much. That was a great conversation, and yeah, really wonderful. And thanks to the audience for coming tonight. It was a great event. It is being recorded, and I'll put it up on our YouTube channel.
Buy her book.
Yes.
It's awesome.
Thank you. Everyone should buy My Fair Junkie too, because that is a hell of a read. It is. I read it in pretty much one sitting. Certainly over the course of it, did not take me more than 10 hours beginning to end. Like, I think I stopped to like feed the dog, take a phone call, but other than that, I just read the whole thing.
Yeah, I know about addiction. I know how to write. I know how to hook people.
It's a great book.
Yeah, I know people were like, I was up all night reading your book. Like, I'm mad. Like, I was late to work reading your book. I'm like, I'm sorry, you know.
I don't mean to, I can't help it. I'm just so compelling. My narrative is so relatable and exciting. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you again.
Good night, everyone. Good night.